Hey folks, Professor Diffley, Philosophy 220, Criminal Justice Ethics. We are in Correctional Ethics, this unit, module here. So picking up where we left off, last video I went through the Correctional Code of Ethics. So back here we looked at some of this. These are the big issues in the range of issues in the field here. Yeah, so these are the big issues in the field here. Proper treatment of the offender, obligations that you owe to those under your supervision, selective treatment or preferential treatment of offenders, misuse of one's official position, that sort of thing. So look at these are from your textbook. This from there. These are some of the biggest ones. So when we talk about preferential or selective treatment, what we're talking about here is undeserved favors. This is where smuggling comes in, bringing contraband, working with inmates to help sell drugs, other things. Transfers. This is helping transfer out people or maybe people you're involved with to better facilities or less restrictive. That selective punishment or harsh treatment. This includes, not punishing some and punishing others, right? It's supposed to be fair and even everybody. Unwarranted use of force, verbal abuse of prisoners, that sort of thing. But that is a common thing where people will take stuff out on certain prisoners over others, usually due to prejudice, that sort of thing is a large of them. But the other is misuse of authority. So using your official position to gain something for yourself. The most common is exploiting offenders under supervision. You especially see this in female prisons, and by this is what statistics say, mostly by male officers exploiting their inmates for sex. Extorting them is promising them worse treatment if they don't have sex with you, that sort of thing. But that is a real issue in there. Another big issue of misuse is concealment of rule violations. Again, failure to act, known violations among offenders, right? So you're misusing your authority, again, maybe, for your own betterment, that sort of thing. Or between offenders, right? So you're helping one over another, one group of prisoners and one particular prisoner over another prisoner or group of prisoner. Not letting some see their visitors, that sort of thing. Helping visitors smuggle things in. Again, misuse of authority there. Supervisors, maybe the brass, maybe the people above are engaged in some ethical violations, and you have a duty to report this and stop it. That sort of thing is what we're looking at here as some of the major issues there. And so selective treatment, again, undesired favors, we talked about that, includes smuggling contraband, cigarettes, cash, drugs in exchange for money or favors the offender can provide. There's a whole range of things there. And again, this is the selective punishment, unwarranted use of force or verbal abuse to control an offender, asserts one's authority, or obtain an advantage to be used against the offender, that sort of thing. So again, you can't use this to get a leg up or gain something for yourself here. Misuse of authority, again, just went through those. Most often involves sex or extortion, that sort of thing. Purposes of control or gratification. When you extort someone, it usually here it was talking about threat of physical or reputational harm in the future, that sort of thing. And other things here can also be the concealment of these violations, right? This is going on. So say another CO is having sex with inmates, so you extort them for money, that sort of thing. And these are, not reporting them are the big issues here. So that is for the Correctionals Code of Ethics. Again, the textbook talks about this a lot. The videos go into it a lot. When you're looking ahead to the what am I talking about? When you're looking ahead to the quiz, when we're talking about the scenarios, these are many of the big issues we're going to talk about. And of course, there's still the other ones with the, know all the code of violations about harassment of fellow coworkers, how you dealing with them, reporting things, that sort of thing. So that is what the code of ethics, especially for this, will be. Going back to here, again, you can see the objectives. We talked about a lot of this: retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, rehabilitation. Will determine, what standards will be in the jail, how things are, how they should be treated. Retribution, obviously, is punishment. Incapacitation is for some people that they have to be kept away from the public. This is incarceration. This is it could be anything from suspending a driver's license or being kept in prison forever because you're just proven you don't have a chance of reforming and not hurting people. Deterrence, the goal of deterring future crime. Many will argue that's looking ahead to the death penalty. Many will argue that this is a main aim for it. A lot of statistics say, though, it doesn't deter violent crimes or anything that could be faced by the death penalty, but that is the goal. You could even argue that retribution is a goal of the death penalty as well. But rehabilitation, reformation, this is really what we're going for in many cases here, is the behavior as a consequence of social or psychological shortcomings. Therefore, correctional time in a corrections facility is meant to correct or treat these shortcomings and fixing them. And so this will this governs how you treat the inmates. You can see that is actually a view taken by the Code of Ethics, is that's why they deserve their fair treatment. You got to respect inmates' rights, that sort of thing. This all should be rehashing things you've taken on other courses here, but just know this is what you need to know in these slides here. The other problem in ethics, corrections, is disparity in sentences. And this really comes when people of similar histories receive widely different sentences. The problem with this is, you should know what you're going to get punished for. We often see this. Sometimes people with money, some groups are punished more than others. People with money can avoid it. And this is why these results, these widely different sentences, has led a trend towards mandatory or fixed sentences, which also brings up problems of its own. There's no room in a mandatory sentencing or fixed sentences for mitigating circumstances and other issues there. And so it's not a solve-all, but it is a goal of them. Some of the other things here, sentencing guidelines that we started to get. To reduce this, a guideline sentence based on seriousness of the crime and prior records. It's almost like a chart. Guidelines are developed, what's the average for this type of crime, depending on, what the offender's past was, what they've done, that sort of thing. Guideline, again, trying to get proportionality and uniformity without mandating specific sentences for certain crimes or offenders. Problem here is those when you have a range. Again, there can still be a range, even when there's these guidelines. It's very rare that people always get the maximum. So there can still, doesn't solve everything, but these are some of the issues. These kinds of things, sentence guidelines, these would be more multiple choice type questions for the exam. Again, and this is the issue with them, as I was saying, they're advisory. They don't have to be followed. Judges often deviate from these sentences. They got to provide written reasons, but it's not always that reviewable in the sense of, again, because they're only advisory, they can take other things into account there. Again, they make possible more accurate predictions of how long someone will be in there, what the prison population will be, but it's unclear, again, how much they are actually followed there. And we look through these here, the correctional ethics one. Let me get out and move on to this there. So, because we did that in the first video, the death penalty and that. So let's just take a look at this. A death penalty. Cruel and unusual punishment. The Eighth Amendment prohibits this. Excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Problem is, what does that mean? Cruel and unusual. What does it mean? It's very hard to define. You won't find a common definition around the globe. They are very different. Even if you go back in time, what was viewed as an acceptable means of execution has changed. Some argue even that just killing prisoners is wrong in that, right? That's just inherently cruel and unusual. But this really is a evolving standard that marks, progress of a maturing society, is what some have argued here. I mean, think about at one point cutting someone's head off, either with an axe or later guillotine was viewed as fine, where we might see that cruel and unusual today. And so other forms of medieval forms of torture and things like that, tearing people's limbs off, that sort of thing. Today we use lethal injection, electric chair, which by our standards, if they're allowed, they're deemed not cruel and unusual. But I'm always curious what the future will think of us. And you'll see in the discussion board in the background I give you those other videos, much of the world doesn't use the death penalty anymore. They believe it is cruel and unusual. And others, especially let's take, for example, lethal injection. Part of the drugs used, the cocktail that's used to execute the prisoner, is something that was actually developed, a drug developed for anesthesia in a surgery. The companies that make them in Europe have actually stopped selling them to prisons and others in the United States because of the way they were being used. The idea was that these companies had made the drugs for use for helping people, not killing people. And so they see that as cruel and unusual. But this, again, it's a evolving standard here. Extreme cases, too. Others will say that corporal punishment, solitary confinement, restraints, and others are held to be cruel and unusual. It depends. Solitary confinement, the argument against that, or long periods of it, is people tend to lose their minds. There have been many prisoners who have killed themselves while in solitary confinement. This is completely cutting people off of any human contact. They do this especially in that max jail, that super max jail out in Colorado, where the feds hold like terrorists and others, where these people are essentially in solitary confinement for about 23 hours a day, very little to no human contact. The argument is those are extreme cases. These are some of the worst offenders ever, mass murderers, terrorists, things like that. So you need to keep them separate. But it's when this hits other, other prison populations, keeping them in poor medical states or bad sanitary conditions. The argument today is that they are still humans. They still have basic rights. They're still citizens. They deserve some fair treatment. In that way. And so these have often been viewed as cruel and unusual. Corporal punishment specifically is physical punishment of a person for their crimes. This is something we don't usually do here, but it has been done in other places. The example in your book, it was a famous one where an American, I believe it was in Singapore, had committed vandalism, and the penalty there was caning, essentially whipping the person. So for a property crime, where we would see that as illegal and violating the Constitution, violating our rights, other places have allowed it. Historically, some of this would be cutting, cutting the hand off of a thief, that sort of thing, mutilation, cutting people's noses off, their ears off, so that everybody knows they were a criminal, branding them, those types of things. Most of this is illegal here in the United States today, although corporal punishment has been allowed in workplaces and schools in the past, but not any longer is where we are now with it. And this is the Michael Fay one. What's Singapore? These 6 lashes with a rattan cane, which each time it hits, it just tears the back open. This is severe physical punishment for what many people would see was just a property crime, that sort of thing. Another concept people have gone to is innovative punishments, finding better ways to punish people. Here is make it so this woman Darlene can't have any more kids. The fear here with this, quite honestly, is that it can go too far. If we can say we can deny a person from having birth control here, or making them use birth control, well, how far else can we go with this? I'll actually pick this up in the last video, the third video, which will be a few minutes long. All right.